Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Blue Raspberry Anaerobic Natural Processed Ethiopia from Luna Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And I absolutely love the artwork of this bag. I think it is the most beautiful artwork I've seen on a bag in a very, very long time. Luna has always had really cool artwork on their bag designs. All right, Luna, based out of Langley, British Columbia. They are a coffee roaster we've reviewed on the channel once before. Last year we did a review of their natural processed Ethiopia Baridi Strawberry Sundae, which was such a good coffee that it finished in our honorable mentions list on our top 10 coffees of last year. So that being said, Luna is probably our favorite Canadian coffee roaster, as they do roast on the lighter side of things. And in my experience, having gone to Vancouver quite extensively in the past, really enjoyed a lot of their offerings, and they've really set the bar kind of high for themselves, especially with their coffee last year. And anytime we do find their coffee something we want to try, because given that we've had such positive experiences with them, want to keep trying more of their coffees and see what they come out with. This coffee, funny enough, right here is the same coffee that we reviewed from Clatch just a couple weeks ago, so it's going to be very interesting to see how this coffee compares in a lighter profile as opposed to something that was a little bit more developed like the Clatch. This right here is day 18 of this coffee. All right, and recipe we have for Luna, they actually have a recipe on their website. It's a 16:1 water to coffee ratio at 210 degrees Fahrenheit. We brew to the Chemex, and they are a light Canadian for the roast profile, as they're one of the lighter roasting Canadian coffee roasters. So with that out of the way, let's start discussing the coffee itself. And day 8, first impression, and it was an interesting first impression and a positive first impression. So what we got was a pretty sweet melon-like cup and a slight bit of tartness in the finish, but the melon was probably the most pronounced thing on this first day. Definitely would describe it as a watermelon, and it was almost reminiscent of a sweet tart in the finish. That was our first impression. Makes a lot of sense as we continue with the notes. Day 10, the coffee really exploded into a very sweet watermelon flavor, and this is what we really want to emphasize on this. Never had a cup of coffee that was clear and distinct watermelon as this cup had been. I was honestly wondering why they labeled it Blue Raspberry, because they, at this point, probably could have labeled it Watermelon Jolly Rancher and they wouldn't have skipped a beat. That was like a perfect description for the way this coffee was coming out, especially in these earlier days. It's had some other secondary factors, but the watermelon in this cup was just so dominant and pronounced that it didn't really matter. You weren't getting as much worth noting in that day 10 cup of coffee. Day 11, again, still super strong watermelon candy. There was a slight bit of some other factors, including some very subtle stone fruits. Could probably describe it as maybe a little bit of mango. And again, a tart berry in the finish, but they were all just secondary to this very, very strong watermelon. Day 12, we started seeing a slight bit of shift. We had described this as maybe a little bit more of a sweet, what's the term? Sweet tart. So it was like a pink sweet tart, and it had a nice balance of that watermelon as well as this kind of really notable tart, and just seeing a little bit of a shift at this time. Still pretty sweet, still pretty lasting. And then day 13 is where this coffee got extremely interesting, as the tart was becoming a lot more pronounced. So we were getting a lot more of the tart berry, and the watermelon was dying down just ever so slightly. Still the most dominant flavor in this cup, but it was dying down significantly enough to the point where it was worth making a note. And we would say that the sugary kind of sweet tart component in this cup was just a little bit more pronounced on this day. And then day 14, we were almost losing any sort of watermelon component in this cup, and it had become a lot more of a tart berry cup at this time. And it started making a lot more sense why they called it a blue raspberry, because the blue raspberry, as they have labeled here, was a lot more pronounced at this time. We felt it was either a shift in the coffee or it was really sensitive to the brew, but given that day 16, our final day of taking notes, we found the exact same thing happening. The watermelon is almost gone at this time. Like, here we are drinking on day 18, and the watermelon is nowhere near as pronounced as it was, especially in the earlier days. At this time, it is definitely significantly more of a sweet tart sort of flavor. You could describe it as that blue sweet tart, pink sweet tart, but definitely a lot more of a tart berry than the watermelon that was experienced very early on in this cup of coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And lots worth noting in this tasting wheel. So the finish at level 5, we've been saying since the very start that it had a very lasting finish, but as the coffee has aged, it's definitely become even more pronounced than it was earlier on. With the watermelon finish, we probably would have put it at like level 4. But since then, yeah, I definitely feel like it's a level 5. This has a very lasting sort of citrus finish. Sweetness, level 4, yeah. Acidity, level 4, honestly, yeah, probably. Saltiness, level 3. Berry fruit, Level 5, and here's what we want to comment on the berry fruit is we've mentioned that it's this very kind of tart berry, and yeah, it's definitely there, but even when it wasn't there, the watermelon is still technically a berry, I believe. So level 5 makes sense for regardless of whatever time you're making this tasting wheel, as that watermelon, we can't harp on enough, was ridiculously pronounced, as mentioned, kind of like a watermelon Jolly Rancher, and then the citrus fruit at level 4. And yeah, there was quite a bit, it felt like quite a bit of lemon that complemented this. It really felt like a raspberry lemon lemonade, and it was a very, very strong kind of tart sort of lemonade in this cup. Anything else worth noting? Bitterness at level 3, we always like to discuss what the bitterness is, and the bitterness is the kind of bitter citrus, so kind of like a very tart lemon, so that's why we have it pretty high, and yeah, it's probably one of the highest bitternesses that's a word, we've experienced from a cup of coffee. Cleanliness level 2, yeah, I don't think that there's too much else worth noting. Tasting wheel looks pretty accurate for the way the coffee is today, but that being said, given how different the cup of coffee was on the earlier days, this tasting wheel would look very different on day 11 or day 12. All right, our overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is an interesting one, as this is essentially drinking 2 different cups of coffee, because we can't emphasize enough how different the coffee was at day 10 through day 16. You had just 2 completely out there different cups of coffee, and that cup of coffee on day 10 was easily going to finish in our top 10 favorite coffees of the year. We had earmarked it for an Ethiopia spot because it was just that unique and different of an Ethiopia that we enjoyed so much. Had never experienced something so watermelon dominant that it was easily earning a spot in the top 10. But that being said, this is still good, but it's not as good. So I don't enjoy the tart berry as much as I enjoy the really clear, pronounced watermelon. So for that reason, it's not quite as good as we had first experienced, and given the shift in the coffee, it is essentially like drinking 2 cups of coffee. So Luna did an amazing job, given that we haven't necessarily liked any of the anaerobic naturals, and we did enjoy this cup of coffee. We enjoyed both of the cups of coffee, but one of them was essentially like easily a top 10, and then the other one was like, okay, this is just good. So just a huge difference in the overall enjoyment of the cup of coffee throughout the time drinking it. Type of person we would suggest this coffee to is, well, it depends, I guess, when you're going to be drinking this. If you're going to be drinking it earlier, then somebody that does enjoy the very strong watermelon candy, as that was very, very nice, very, very pronounced. But somebody that does enjoy a more tart berry, then this is for you if you're going to wait on the coffee, because that was a lot more pronounced and that was a lot more noticeable in the later half of the coffee itself. Also, keep in mind, this is a lighter profiled coffee. It is an anaerobic, so it's going to have a lot of strong components in this cup as well. Like the acidity is going to be pretty high, and it's going to be a very, very lasting, strong cup of coffee. So yeah, that's kind of the person we would suggest this coffee to. Kind of hard to describe this in the sense that it was just so different, but at the same time, I feel like this is a pretty accurate representation of what we experienced from this coffee. So I think we will leave it at that. If you have by chance had an opportunity to try this, we would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Blue Raspberry Anaerobic Natural Processed Ethiopia from Luna Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.